The following content that you are about to accept into your ear holes may not be suitable for all audiences, even if we are describing the most cutesy of all of the cryptids out there. He is one good boy, that is for certain. A good boy who holds one heavy duty on his shoulder.
Duty.
And who knows, maybe by the end of this story you'll find the explanation for feeling like someone's watching you in the woods. Maybe it's not someone looking to harm you, but to warn you about things to come. For the Mothman cometh.
After we tune to the right radio station for these random thoughts.
I am Rock Lee, and you're listening to the Zane Man.
Oh yes, Danhausen here, Danhausen. Listen to the Zan Man, or be cursed.
Tonight I am Batman, and you're listening to the Zan Man.
Well, Mr. Zan Man.
You may not have said it out loud, you may not have left it in a comment, but I heard you scurvy dogs loud and clear. You don't like me talking about bluey theories, you don't like me talking about a lot of these topics, as much as you like hearing me tell a good old-fashioned story. And ladies and gentlemen, we have one of the best here today. I originally was going to save this for like episode 10, but long-time listener of the podcast, forever how long this podcast has been out, but even before then, somebody who's always enjoyed my content, somebody who's always been one of my supporters, my OGs, ride or die, holla back, Rocky Balboa. Thank you, brother. You sent me a picture of one of the coolest shirts ever, Mothman in the form of Mountain Dew. I even went online and found it. I will be ordering it soon. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, that's inspired me to move it forward, and the Mothman cometh early. And here we are. Though admittedly, this is not my first time doing some form of a podcast episode around the Mothman, but I'm even more excited now than I was then to do this episode of the podcast. For no other reason than I learned some information that I didn't know before. I'm arguably going a little bit more into detail than I did in that episode. And overall, I'm just expecting it to be one of the best episodes of any podcast that I've ever produced. I'm already hyping it up. I'm probably already setting myself up for failure. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this Mothman ride as much as I did. Yeah. There's really not too much to talk into. I'm expecting this to take a little bit longer to record. So without further ado, the Mothman cometh. I'm saying that way too much. Into the Harbinger of Doom. Yes, that's better. Here on episode 7, which is my lucky number, I'm pretty sure it's like everyone's lucky number. So it's actually part of my actual lucky number because my birthday is July 20th. So it's 720. Well, I just removed the 0 in 72. Like if I'm playing a baseball game or if I'm playing some sort of sports game, I try and make my number 72. But there's some games where you can only have certain numbers if you're a certain kind of player, like on the defense or the offense. So I try to get 72 or somewhere close to it. This went on for way too long. I thought I was going to finish up way before. But yes, ladies and gentlemen, episode 7 is technically my lucky number. It's everybody's lucky number. And it felt appropriate to do the Mothman because he is a cryptid that I absolutely fell in love with the moment I heard about him. And admittedly, for someone who hangs around the certain circles of the internet that I do, it took me a while to hear about him. But when I did, I went full in on it. I even, on my old podcast, immediately did an episode, immediately ordered way too many Mothman shirts, and now I'm hooked. One of my goals is to eventually go to West Virginia and visit the Mothman Museum, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, but I think we should officially just dive into the story. without me needing to monologue any further, and I think the perfect place to start is what or who or what is the Mothman? Well, you may have heard me say a special word earlier. The Mothman is a cryptid. And that's where we'll immediately pause on the description because we have to establish what a cryptid is for those who may not be aware. Because I know that in the circle that I run outside of the podcast, for my friends who may be supporting me, you may not know what a cryptid is. So this is mainly for you and we're just friendly here. The official internet definition of what a cryptid is a cryptid is a creature whose existence is unproven, but rumored or often reported. They often appear in folklore or have reported sightings following them. Essentially, it's an animal that people claim to have seen or heard about, but for which there is no scientific evidence to confirm its existence. You've probably heard of a cryptid. Here's a couple of the big examples: Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, and the Jersey Devil. And I hope there's at least one person out there that's like, hey, Bigfoot not a cryptid. He real. I saw him. And if you have seen any of these, please email me at the podcast and the show notes. You can find all of our social medias and everything. Let me know. I want to share some of your stories if you have indeed seen any of these. But unpause. We're going to go back to the Mothman. The Mothman is one of these cryptids that we just described. Mothman is described as a bipedal, winged humanoid. Despite his name, which was given to him by newspapers, he is in no way moth-like, and has the appearance more of that of a large humanoid owl, or a bat, I would say. I'll go into that here in a second. His coloration varies from black, gray to even brown, although it is usually on the darker shades. He is often reported to be about 7 feet tall, with a wingspan about 10 to 15 feet or more, plus the ability to fly over 100 miles per hour, which we will tell how that's possible. Well, not how it's possible, but why there's a story of him flying 100 miles an hour. Either way. Sometimes he's described as not having a head, with having 2 huge red eyes set in his chest area. These eyes are reported to be glowing, or at least reflective. The details of his face and his feet have never been adequately described. So, based on all of the, descriptions that I just gave, there are some iterations of people seeing him where he did resemble more of a moth. But if you've ever seen the Mothman statue, which I'm going to be posting a bunch of stuff on social media, so you're going to want to follow me. Go ahead and go to the show notes, follow all those things. I'm plugging it way too much, but there's going to be a lot of content that gets uploaded to those things to kind of complement this. And on the statue, he looks kind of more like a bat. But there are instances where the eyes on the chest resemble that of a moth, of an actual moth, like a crushed together bug. However, the statue is the more accepted version of the appearance, but, and here's the next portion of the notes, due to the popularity of Batman TV series at the time, the fictional superhero Batman and his rogues gallery were prominently featured in the public eye. While the villain Killer Moth did not appear in the show, the comic book influence of both him and Batman is believed by some to have influenced the coinage of the name Mothman in the local newspapers. So, there are many people that actually believe that the Mothman's original name was supposed to be Batman because he resembled more of a bat than a moth. But they gave up the idea in favor of the Mothman due to it already being a well-recognized name from the Cape Crusader himself. Plus, I don't know if the killer moth was already, created by this point. I'm a terrible DC fanboy. I'm supposed to know this stuff. But I think that was the main reason, is they were like, oh, Batman's already taken. Well, his wings are kind of fuzzy like a moth. Mothman. And that's literally kind of how the name was coined. Probably not quite like that, but that's how I like to envision it. Either way, that happened whenever he was first spotted and he started showing up in the newspapers, because that's how prominently this cryptid is featured in Point Place, West Virginia's lore. He showed up in the newspaper, not necessarily pictured or anything. But before we start talking about his first couple of sightings, I know we're going to talk about like the theories behind where Mothman came from and everything. But there's a particular story that I want to read to kind of set it up, because I think it's, out of all of the explanations and everything, it's one of the stories that like, this happened and now we're reaping what we sowed kind of deal. And it's called The Curse of Chief Cornstalk, and it'll become apparent as to why this associates with the Mothman, because it's going to, at first, I'll warn you, it's going to seem like it has nothing to do with it. And I'm pretty sure it's actually disproven, but we're still going to read it. I love the story. The most widely spread rumor about the inception of the Mothman goes back a bit to 1776. The Shawnee and Cherokee tribes had united to keep the Americans from claiming more of the land. This was going to prove disastrous for both tribes, and the Shawnee and their leader, Chief Cornstalk, knew it. In an effort to potentially quell hostilities and get a better idea of what the enemy wanted, Chief Cornstalk made the brave decision of visiting Fort Randolph in modern-day Point Place, West Virginia, which is where the Mothman was first sighted. Spoiler. The fort's leader imprisoned Cornstalk, the chief's son, and 2 others immediately. While being imprisoned, one of the Shawnees killed an American soldier just a bit outside of the fort perimeter. The Americans were enraged by this and decided it was good enough reason to kill 4 unarmed Shawnees that they had imprisoned for trying to talk terms. This military tactic has been since coined as a cowardly move by modern historians. I had to change a word there because I don't curse. As the tale suggests, Cornstalk cursed the people of the fort and the town itself for the next 200 years. While this lines up with the sightings of the Mothman later in the 1960s, it has been speculated to be a work of fiction from a local theater who dramatized the production in 1921. Still, there is proof that Chief Cornstalk did exist and that the Americans at Fort Randolph had committed atrocities. So there was some liable. It says later on in the article that this was all disproven, but it doesn't explain how it was disproven. Other than there not being like a particular recording of him screaming out that he's cursing the land or anything like that. So I'm still gonna say it's true. And so in 1776, in retaliation for his people being killed by the Americans, unarmed and peacefully they were trying to be, they cursed Point Place, West Virginia, with some truly dark implications. And it's real. And it's real. And this curse would bring us all the way, less than 200 years later, so it's not expired yet, to 1966, where we have the first official sighting of the Mothman. When it comes to the first sighting of the Mothman, it was a very low-key affair in comparison to the sighting that made this beast famous. The first sighting of the winged beast goes back to 1966, when a group of grave diggers, 5 men total, were at work preparing a fresh grave in Clinton, West Virginia. They noticed a giant creature soaring between the trees overhead, the size of a man with abnormally large wings. Now, I've been listening to all sorts of different podcasts and reading different articles to prepare for this podcast, and none of them can seem to agree on the details. And I haven't read any of the official books that were, written as kind of documentation about what was going on. And so the museum itself and everything probably have the answers to this. But they can't seem to decide whether all 5 men were in agreement that they saw something, or if it was just one of the men who convinced the rest of them to back him up. And they really had admitted that they hadn't seen anything. And so I go back and forth on this because my first implication is like 5 different men saw this beast. It must be real. But like, they were off digging the grave of one of the gentleman's father-in-law, and they saw this big winged beast just kind of fly. And they there are a couple of articles that suggested that they didn't know what they saw, and they only came forward with this report because although date-wise this was the first recorded sighting in the timeline, it was not the first report that came forward altogether. So Statistically, it came first, but it wasn't reported until someone else reported that they saw the Mothman, if that makes sense. And you'll notice that with a lot of these stories is that the details are kind of iffy. And there were literally hundreds of sightings of the Mothman in the time frame that he first came about. And so there's speculation that once the first people came forward with, oh, there's this moth thing, you know, there was a lot of people that just kind of hopped on the bandwagon and were like, yeah. And they very clearly saw a bat flying around their lantern or whatever. It's not the 1700s, Alex, but they see like a bat flying around the lights or flying around a water tower. And they're like, it's the Mothman. I saw him too. So there was definitely a lot of that, a lot of hysteria, around this time frame. They didn't have the distractions we have nowadays with cell phones and computers and podcasts. Wink, wink. They had to find whatever they could to entertain themselves, especially in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And so I'm setting this up as I start reading a bunch of these other sightings, letting you know that there are definitely some of these people that believe what they saw, but there's probably a lot of these sightings that are like, me too. So let's go forward with the official first reported sighting itself, which this first reporting happened 3 days after I keep wanting to say grave robber, but the grave digger incident, where two couples saw the creature for themselves on a date night from hell. There was actually a clip from a newspaper, which I will read now. It entitles, "Red-Eyed Creature," quote unquote, reported in West Virginia. Two Point Pleasant couples told police Wednesday that their car was followed at about midnight by a bird-like creature 6 to 7 feet tall with red eyes and a 10-foot wingspan. Steve Millett and Roger Scarberry and their wives told Mason County Sheriff's deputies that they were riding near McClintock Wildlife Reserve when they first encountered the thing. Millett said it was large, measuring as much as 7 feet, was gray in color with eyes 2 inches in diameter. He said the eyes glowed red, quote unquote, when the car headlights were put on them near the abandoned power plant. Then Millett said that, quote unquote, thing took off, making a flapping noise and traveled at high speeds at about 100 miles an hour, quote unquote. Millett added, it was a clumsy runner. Scarberry said, if I had seen it by itself, I wouldn't have said anything about it, but there were 4 of us who saw it together, end quote. And that was pretty much to prove to you how serious these events were taken. I said that it was a big event in Point Pleasant, and it definitely was. It was not just a brief moment where, like Bigfoot, where people are like, yeah, right, that's just a man in the forest. It happened to where enough people ended up snowballing this thing into a pretty big event where people were sighting this thing every couple of days or every couple of weeks for like a 5-6 month duration. But that was just to give you a glimpse that there are newspaper clippings that covered this entire hysteria, which I'll have to find more and post them on my social media links. But allow me to do a better job of documenting the story further, because you were probably able to piece some of it together. But let me just tell you the story. On November 15th, 1966, Roger and Linda Scarberry and their friends Steve and Mary Millett were driving through an area of Point Pleasant referred to as the TNT. This was named for the World War II manufacturing plants that are located in the area. And as their car sped through the murky darkness of the forest, they chanced upon something that would change their lives forever. The Scarberry's headlights revealed a large gray creature with glowing red eyes and massive wings. The creature had stopped in the middle of the road, quickly turning to stare forebodingly at the oncoming vehicle. As the car veered to avoid hitting it, the creature flew off into the nearby swamplands, in which the car screeched to a halt, almost careening off the road into the trees. Shocked, the 4 people sat stunned in silence for a moment. Then, Steve Millett, hearing something, looked out of the rear window of the car and claimed that he saw the glowing red eyes of the creature zooming down the roadway right to their position. Roger stepped on the gas, jolting the car forward, and the creature gave chase as the vehicle steadily increased its speed. Roger claimed that he was driving so fast, as fast as the car could go, which was nearly 100 miles per hour. So that's why everybody's like, the Mothman can fly up to 100 miles an hour because of this initial story right here. But the flying creature kept up. That is until the car left the TNT area and the creature just kind of disappeared into the night. The four of them arrived in town, startled and confused and with no sign of the mysterious bird that had chased them. Roger parked his car at the edge of town and they discussed their encounter. They eventually decided that what they saw was nothing more than an aberrant bird, and in an attempt to face their fears, they again drove towards the TNT area. It wasn't long before they saw the creature again, apparently waiting on them besides Route 62. The couples now realized that their stalker was no bird, but in the instant that the car's headlights landed on the creature, it lifted vertically into the air with tremendous speed and disappeared above the tree line. And there were actually a couple of extra details that were left out of this writing of the event. Linda Scarberry noted that when she tried to look at the details of the creature's face, she was distracted by the quote-unquote hypnotic effect of the glowing red eyes and that they seemed to do. Apparently it caused visions and stuff to go in her head. Granted, Linda Scarberry also was a very disturbed woman and had a lot of mental issues throughout her life. So how reliable that might be, it might have stemmed from this event, but it also very well just might have been something that was always there. So we got to keep that in mind when we're taking in our information. 2, the location in the TNT where they saw the Mothman in the road was just off a path that leads to the Point Place North power plant, which I'm pretty sure it actually had in there. So either way, now you know if you didn't know. And to talk further about the TNT area, we'll quote an article that suggests the following. In 1979, fishermen in the TNT area reported that chemicals had been left to seep into ponds, like the ponds in the area, causing it to be labeled as an environmental disaster. By 1983, the TNT area was among the country's most polluted sites. This particular detail leads to many people believing that the mutation had something to do with the creation of this creature, which will be brought up later in the podcast episode. This is further backed up by the fact that many people believed, though never proved, that Mothman actually stayed at the Point Place North power plant that we had just mentioned. And between staying here and visiting the polluted TNT area, this creature grew into what it was. And there are some articles that seem to suggest that the power plant was once home to establishing nuclear weapons with a secret military base operation, in which a lot of those details will be unpacked further, maybe, or support some of the claims of what the Mothman actually is a little bit later. But we are going to continue to move forward in the story, in which we don't have to go very far, because over the next few days, other Point Pleasant residents claimed to witness the winged creature as well. 2 volunteer firemen who said it was a large bird with red eyes claimed to have seen it. Mason County Sheriff George Johnson believed the sightings were due to an unusually large heron. He termed a shite poke heron. Newell Partridge, a resident of Salem, West Virginia, claimed that he saw strange patterns appearing on his television screen one night, followed by a mysterious sound just outside of his home. Shining a flashlight towards the direction of the noise when he went outside, Partridge supposedly witnessed 2 red eyes resembling bicycle reflectors looking back at him. Additionally, he blamed buzzing noises from his television set and the disappearance of his German Shepherd dog on the creature. Richard West from Charleston reported seeing a 6-foot-tall figure with a wingspan of 6 to 8 feet and red eyes perched on the top of his neighbor's roof. It remained there for a while before taking off straight up like a helicopter. Tom Urey reported spotting the Mothman while he was driving along Route 62 near the TNT area, much like the original couple that we just talked about. It was early morning when he saw a large grayish figure standing in a field before it suddenly lifted straight into the air and flew over his car. 5 pilots at Gallipolis Airport in Ohio reportedly saw a giant gray bird flying about 70 miles per hour. Its wings were not moving and it had a longish neck. Connie Carpenter reported seeing a grayish bird-like humanoid figure standing on the golf course near Mason when she was on her way home from church before it flew away. Ruth Foster of St. Albans reported having sighted the Mothman standing in her yard near her porch. Interestingly, her description of the Mothman was similar to that of Richard West. And note that all of these sightings that I just mentioned were about 2.5 months within each other, which kind of shows that we're in that, hey, me too era of things, where the mass hysteria is at its highest. I think within a year of the first sighting, we have over 100 sightings. And like I said, it's every couple of weeks to within days of each other. You don't go too long without someone seeing the Mothman. And so while you have a bunch of people that might believe what they saw or have no explanation to what they actually saw and just claim it was the Mothman, you have a lot of people who are probably just jumping on the bandwagon. Like a couple of the ones that weren't mentioned and now I'm kind of wishing I had details for, is there's one guy who claimed to throw a rock at it and it like let out a screech and attacked his car and everything like that. It was one of those stories that was a little bit too in-your-face action hero-y to be a real story. And there was one lady who dropped her baby because the Mothman startled her by peeking through her window. And a lot of people just speculate that she told that story because she wanted an explanation of why she dropped her baby. So it was just like, hey, how did you drop Geraldine? It was the Mothman. Yeah. I'm not a terrible mom. It's the Mothman's fault. Because the Mothman eventually, during this hysteria, was like the scapegoat for everything, which would lead to further speculation of events that I have yet to talk about. So, uh-oh. But around this time, through all the different stories, there was a lot of speculation about what Mothman even was. A couple positive, but mostly everybody was like, this giant monster. And that was kind of the depiction that was going around. There were biologists and scientists who kind of inserted their take on it. Wildlife biologist Robert L. Smith, in particular, at Western Virginia University, told reporters that descriptions and sightings fit the sandhill crane, a large American crane almost as tall as a man with a 7-foot wingspan, and it just happens to have reddish coloring around its eyes. Most birds also, their eyes are set up in a certain way where they will reflect light, which would kind of go in line with the light reflector view that a lot of people were getting from shining the flashlight on it. The bird may have wandered out of its migration route because there are no cranes in the area, and therefore was unrecognized at first because obviously it's not native to this region. But others took that theory even further, speculating toxins from a nearby TNT area had mutated a sandhill crane altogether, making it a humanoid-type creature. This would account for the possible glowing appearance and large size. Another bird with glowing red eyes that could be the culprit: owls. The night birds can have larger than expected wingspans for being so tiny, and their eyes literally glow red when caught in the light. It's possible a large owl spooked a few residents one night and the legend was born around it, because we all know how people can embellish and take it to that next level. But as we can see, it's being painted in all sorts of different colors. But the Mothman would take on a different color for the people once the Silver Bridge incident happened, which is what made the Mothman truly famous. Like, for real, this was the event that caused the book to be written because, well, I am going to cover the book in a different podcast. I've already purchased it and everything as of this recording, and I'm planning on going in depth and seeing if there are any details of the Mothman that it reveals that I didn't know and stuff like that. And so I'm looking forward to covering the Mothman prophecies at a later date. But this was the event where he started putting the pieces together. John Keel, the author of that book, started being like, oh,
There's more to this Mothman that meets the eye. He's not scaring teenagers. He's not taking pigs out into the woods and eating them. He's warning us about something. And this was it. We missed it. It was right before our very... I don't even know if that's the tone of the book, but from what I've read, that's kind of what it's like. But before we get to that point, which is in a future episode, we have to cover what is the Silver Bridge incident. And there's only one place to start. By this point, there were over 100 sightings of the Mothman by the time the Silver Bridge incident rolled around. The sightings came to a halt in 1967 after a terrible tragedy occurred in Point Pleasant. The Silver Bridge, which carried U.S. Route 35 over the Ohio River and connected Point Pleasant to Gallipolis, Ohio, that's a cool name, collapsed on December 15th under the weight of a heavy rush hour traffic due to the upcoming Christmas holiday. The accident ended up killing 46 people, and 2 of those bodies were never found. Though the tragedy was later attributed to a faulty I-bar suspension chain and poor maintenance of the bridge, shocker, poor maintenance of something in America, that didn't stop the conspiracy theories. Writer John Keel, who had an interest in the extraterrestrial life and other paranormal activities, wrote a book called Mothman Prophecy. See, I told you. I was right. I'm right about some stuff. I do research sometimes, guys. Linking the bridge collapse with the sightings of the Mothman. Indeed, despite a few lingering reports in the days that the bridge fell, the Mothman sightings almost completely ceased after December 15th. In that information vacuum, the local legend spread like wildfire, with tall tales springing up almost instantly as the bridge went down. The carnage and mass death of the accident prompted many people come forward claiming to have seen the Mothman sitting atop the bridge just a few days prior to its collapse. Interesting. Keel believed this was no coincidence. In his book, he surmised the Mothman sightings that Point Pleasant locals had were premonitions about the bridge about to collapse. Keel also linked the monster to UFOs and Men in Black. He was certainly fanciful with his findings, but without him, the legacy of the Mothman might have just stayed this tiny local legend. You might have heard the word Men in Black come up, and not to be confused with the Will Smith movie. That is actually based on real quote-unquote events that happened throughout the United States whenever people would claim to see like extraterrestrial life or something like that. All of a sudden, Men in Black would start appearing around their house. And much like how in the film, if spoiler alert, Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith's characters would go up, like brief the people who claim to have seen aliens and then wipe their memory after they learned everything they knew. These people would essentially go to people's houses, allegedly, and threaten them to stay quiet about the information they've heard, which we'll get into that a little bit later, but I just wanted to touch on that. Yes, Mothman has a lot to do with the alien scene, UFOs and Men in Black, as we said. We'll continue reading. Instead, his book, published in 1975, brought renewed attention to the creature and sparked a surge in interest. The book became a 2002 movie, yeah, it's real, starring Richard Gere and Laura Linney, fully bringing the story of the Mothman into the mainstream. Now, I am going to do a Myrar of the movie at some point, Mothman Prophecies, but from what I hear, it's not actually about the Mothman, but I could be wrong. I don't know. I remember hearing criticism about that where they people were expecting to go in and just see seeing a Mothman fly around. Apparently that's not the case. But I will be watching it. Probably not for this episode, but it seems fitting to, on the episode where I actually read passages from the book and stuff, to do the movie on that episode. Because of the book and because of the movie, a creature that would once have the reputation of being the terrorizer of Point Pleasant will now be rebranded as the Harbinger of Doom. He wasn't seen as the cause of the Silver Bridge incident, as we have already established, but it was believed that he was instead the warning that would point people of Point Pleasant, my goodness, what a sentence, to the events that would come.
this reputation would be further cemented as people all over the world would claim to see Mothman at various points in history, days, moments, or even briefly seconds before tragedy would strike. Which we are going to cover that right here. The Silver Bridge incident, even though it was the last time Mothman was claimed to be seen in Point Pleasant, but much like most legends of Jason Voorhees, who's strictly a movie character, but I digress. Sometimes these horror movie icons are too big to stay in one spot. Camp Crystal Lake move aside, we're going to New York City. Just like that, the Mothman would go all over the world. I didn't need to include that, but it is true. Mothman, the article we just read, claimed that all viewing stopped December 15th. Maybe just in Point Pleasant, but he was seen throughout the United States and in other countries. Now, much like the situation in Point Pleasant where there were over 100 sightings, there were sightings all over the world that, seemed fabricated or seemed weird or didn't quite fit the criteria. And so we will be covering the stories that seem the most likely to be genuine sightings. Well, whatever that means. The first one is Chicago Mothman. Accounts that recently took place in 2011 and 2017. The reason the Chicago sightings get a bit more credibility is due to how many witnesses reported seeing him from Chicago all the way to Woodstock, Illinois. So yeah, from Chicago to Woodstock, a bunch of people claim to have seen this entity, whatever it ended up being. There is also video evidence, though nowadays that is very easy to fake. So yeah, there's a bunch of claims that in the, not skyscrapers, but in the tall buildings of Chicago, there was something flying around, and that's where the video evidence comes in, is there's just something circling one of the buildings in Chicago. It lands on a building, and it kind of looks like a giant bird, much like a lot of the descriptions we've seen so far. And it was pretty consistent throughout that passage in Illinois. So it is very quote-unquote credible in comparison to a lot of these. Probably the most credible one when you're sticking it next to something like how many sightings were in Point Pleasant. I'm becoming redundant at this point, but I just want to stress that the 2011 and 2017 sightings of Chicago are probably the closest thing we have to Point Pleasant. And although this next one doesn't necessarily call what they saw the Mothman, rather there is the Owl of Monan, or the Cornish Owlman, which was sighted in Cornwall, England, a year after the Mothman Prophecies book was published. Convenient timing, I would say. The sightings were also a bit of a prankster and or a liar. Were also from someone who was a bit of a prankster and or a liar. He wasn't a trusted source. Even the person who had written the book admitted that it may be a work of fiction on part of this witness. This thing was claimed to be seen in 1978, 1979, 1989, and even 1995. The story originated when Tony, also known as Doc Shields, who had been involved in a series of monster-raising exploits in 1976, claimed to have investigated a report of two young girls on holiday in Monan, who saw a large winged creature hovering above the tower of St. Monan and St. Stephen's Church. According to most versions of the story, the girls, identified as June and Vicky Melling, were so frightened by the sight of a large feathered birdman that their father Don immediately cut short their family holiday after hearing the tale. According to Shields, one of the girls provided him with a drawing of the creature, which he dubbed Owlman. However, and this is what cracked me up when I read it, reported sightings of it flying above the church have led pretty much everyone in the area to believe that the creature was just a common barn owl. How do you get the two mixed up? Plus, the reports that those two girls were very young. It's weird that people would take their word for it, but with the mass hysteria of Mothman, it probably traveled. especially with it being how popular it was and the book winning all sorts of awards and stuff like that. It probably reached this community and caused that hysteria, especially since this family was visiting on holiday away from the area. So I believe that it literally was that mass hysteria where they just saw something common and their brain just warped it. This next one's unique because another claim wasn't like a bunch of people going, Godzilla, Godzilla, but with Mothman and pointing at the sky or anything like that, or people even reporting to the newspaper. Another claim was simply 2 photos being uploaded online, and they were taken by a guy in New York City on, get this, September 11th, 2001. And no one is able to refute, like, there's obviously people who say the photos are fake, but no one can fully refute it because he uploaded them and was just, like, they were on his professional photography site and everything. And it shows a couple days before the events of September 11th, this bird-looking figure, and it does kind of look like the pictures of Mothman from a distance online. Obviously, my opinion is that they're probably fake. But this was before Photoshop and editing and all that stuff was like the big norm on the internet to fake stuff like this. And if he's uploading it to a professional site, that could affect his credibility. It probably was more likely just a giant bird or something like that. But I'll upload them on our social media sites and you guys can take a look for yourselves. But I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But essentially, the Mothman predicted September 11th. Even though the Harbinger of Doom tends to, like, the whole thing was pointed to, the bridge was like this big accident. And even though there were things that led to it, it wasn't like somebody just went and blew up the bridge or anything. So this kind of goes against the grain, against a lot of the other events that are claimed, because it's not an accident. September 11th was a very orchestrated, big terrorist attack. So that's another reason why a lot of people were like, no, it wasn't Mothman. Which I just realized I didn't explain what tragedy happened in Chicago. In 2011, the tragedy that followed was a huge Groundhog Day blizzard in which a lot of accidents happened. And it was just a historic blizzard all the way around, dumping over 20 inches of snow, causing widespread power outages, traffic paralysis, school closures, and it caused at least 36 deaths related to the event. In 2017, the July floods in Lake County were the ones that kind of it was alluding to, apparently. Torrential rains caused significant flooding in Lake County, Illinois, which is near Chicago. Though off my initial Google search of this information, I couldn't find any deaths related to this. Still, a flooding is a tragic event, and lots of property damage and stuff could come from that, and lots of lives being affected by that. So that's the justification for the event that he was predicting. The next instance, we're not even sure if this is really the Mothman, but its MO is very much the same. We have to travel to Germany on the 10th of September in 1978 to Freiburg, Germany. Miners were getting ready to enter a mine that they worked at when all of a sudden a massive black creature with big spread out wings blocked their way inside. Like, I imagine it was standing on top of the mine and they were like, I can't go in because it'll reach down and carry me into the forest or something like that. I don't know. Oh, wait, no. See, Kyle! No, I'm joking. Okay. I'm sorry. I am so sorry. They tried to approach it, but then the creature emitted an inhuman roar, reminding them of the sound of a train to a screeching to a halt or the screams of 50 people at once. Those are two distinctly different sounds. Which one is it, people of Freiburg? After an hour of waiting, for the creature to leave, they left, hoping that it would make the animal go away. Later on, they found out that the creature actually saved their lives. An underground explosion had taken place in the mine, and the mine was set ablaze. So they would have been burned alive. The Freiburg Shrieker actually saved them. And this doesn't quite match the MO of the Mothman, because the Mothman's one of those things where it just kind of wants to be seen, but doesn't want to put on too much of a display. The Freiburg Shrieker was straight up like, get out of here! Get out of here! I meant just flexing on them, shrieking down at them, but It matched the description that is typically described. The only detail that was missing, because I looked at 2 different websites that detailed the Freeburg Shrieker. Most of the time it was just like, the Freeburg Shrieker saved miners. This and another website were actually the ones that gave details of what exactly happened. And they omitted the sight of blazing red eyes, which is why this might just be a different creature altogether, but you never know. Mothman made his way to Germany, got some nice sausage. Another event that Mothman was supposedly seen at, though, was a big catastrophic event that is very infamous at this point, very well known. It's the Chernobyl event. And if you don't know what that is, well, here, let me just read it for you. In Chernobyl, right before the reactor went literally nuclear, like a nuclear reactor pretty much shut down and exploded, due to some errors and accidents, keyword there, from some men. Beginning in early April of 1986, the people in and around the little-known Chernobyl nuclear power plant began to experience a series of strange events revolving around sightings of a mysterious creature described as a large, dark, headless man with gigantic wings and piercing red eyes. See, that's what was missing from the Shrieker. People affected by this phenomena experienced horrific nightmares, threatening phone calls, and first-hand encounters of the winged beast, which became known as the Black Bird of Chernobyl. That's such a boss name, dude. I want to start a band just so I can write a song called The Black Bird of Chernobyl. Reports of these strange happenings occurred and increased until the morning of April 26, 1986, when at 1:23 a.m., Reactor 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant suffered a catastrophic steam explosion that resulted in a fire, which caused a series of additional explosions followed by a nuclear meltdown. The power plant, located near Pripyat, Ukraine, Soviet Union, spewed a plume of radioactive fallout, which drifted over parts of Western Soviet Union, Eastern and Western Europe, Scandinavia, the UK, Ireland, Eastern North America. Large areas of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia were badly contaminated, resulting in the evacuation and resettlement of over 336,000 people. The Chernobyl disaster, as the incident was dubbed, is considered the worst accident ever in the history of nuclear power. Following the meltdown and subsequent explosions and fires, Soviet helicopters were dispatched at the scene and equipped with special firefighting gear. These helicopters circled the plant, dropping clay and sand and lead and other extinguishing chemicals onto the burning facility, and most of the fire was put out by 5 a.m. The fire burning in radioactive 4 continued to blaze for several hours after. The firefighters who responded were unaware of the nature of the fire, assuming that it was simply an electrical fire, and received masses of overdoses of radiation, leading to many of their deaths. So it didn't just kill the scientists, it killed many things in the area, it contaminated the areas around it. It was a big catastrophic event. And as stated earlier, the workers definitely had the face. They were literally melting in their hospital beds from how much radiation they absorbed. But the workers who survived the initial blast and fire would later obviously die of that radiation poisoning. They claim to have witnessed what has been described as a large black bird-like creature with a 20-foot wingspan gliding through the swirling plumes of irradiating smoke that poured from the reactor. No further sightings of the Black Bird of Chernobyl were reported following the disaster, leaving researchers to speculate just what haunted the workers at the plant during the days leading up to the disaster. The most commonly accepted theory suggests that the Black Bird of Chernobyl was the same creature spotted in Point Pleasant of West Virginia all those years ago that showed up prior to the collapse of the Silver Bridge on December 15th, 1968. So, yeah, pretty intense if you ask me. That the Blackbird, such a cool name though. Easily out of all these, the Freeburg Shrieker has nothing on the Blackbird of Chernobyl. Are you kidding me? Starting a band called the Blackbirds of Chernobyl. But apparently that wasn't the only catastrophic event. Sometimes it predicts natural disasters as well, because in Japan, before the 2011 tsunami, In March of 2011, tragedy struck Japan. A massive magnitude 9 earthquake tore through, generating a devastating tsunami that battered the coastal Tohoku region of the country's eastern coast and left death and destruction in its wake. As if the potent quake and resulting wave weren't bad enough, the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant was so badly damaged that it went into a nuclear meltdown that was to be one of the worst in history, poisoning the environment, poisoning the animals, poisoning the people, and causing lasting ripples that reverberate to this day. To this day. The event was especially frightening to this writer. Okay. Sorry. Whoever wrote this article, it was especially frightening to them, as he lives in Japan and was here during that time. Although I was safely out of harm's way in Tokyo as the breathtaking horrors of the disaster flashed across the TV screen, it felt like a surreal nightmare being viewed through the lens of sleep, as it couldn't possibly be happening, but here it was. On the ground in the affected region, things were much more real, although many of these people perhaps still thought of it as some sort of bad dream from which they might wake. Thousands upon thousands of people dead and many more injured or left homeless. The sound of screaming and crying in the background score to all the carnage. The landscape had become a wasteland of broken debris, carcasses, smashed buildings, and shattered dreams. A shadowy skeleton of what it once had been. The ruthless tsunami had tossed cars, trees, houses, about as they were mere playthings, upending and dashing them Okay, let's skip into the actual sightings, shall we? Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to cut down the 2011 event. It did a good job of painting the picture, but I'm not trying to describe that disaster anymore. We already got how bad it was. We don't need to be like, this author took it personally and I started stabbing the water because it attacked my friends. Well, that's great. Let's get to the bird creature, shall we? Ah, yes, here we go. In the days leading up to the deadly Japanese earthquake and the massive tsunami, a witness named Marcus Pules claims to have made a sighting of what he describes as the Mothman in that area. Pules said that he had been in Japan on business, that we always are on business, in February of 2011 and had decided to stay with a friend who had long lived in Japan teaching English in the... Okay, irrelevant. One day the two friends went out to look around the town, and in the evening they went to the seaside, walking along a trail meandered near the Daiichi Fukushima nuclear power plant, at this point still in working condition, with no hint to major disaster and the specter of doom it was to become. As they walked along, Pules claims that he heard a sudden whoosh, which he first took it to be sounds of nearby ocean waves crashing against the rocks. But his mind was changed when the sound repeated and then was followed by an ear-piercing shriek, the likes of which he had never heard before. His friend heard it as well, as did a couple of people who had been on the same path for a romantic evening stroll. Pules would say, "We heard it again, the whooshing noise, I mean, followed by an ear-pitching screech that shook me down to the bone and made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. We looked around for the cause of the noise, and when we heard that sound again, the best way I can describe it is a city's bus brakes when they are in need of a service. A loud, ear-splitting noise." That's actually in line with that train stopping noise. So maybe the shrieker's not far off Framberg. We both continued to look around when my friend's attention was drawn toward the plant by another nearby couple. A younger couple, Godzilla, out for a walk, were staring toward the plant, arms outstretched in obvious fear and their voices showing itself. Pules then looked towards the power plant looming in the distance and thought he could make out a large shadowy figure silhouetted by the plant's lights and the moonlight, which appeared to be sitting perched atop one of the buildings. As he stared at it, trying to figure out who or what it could be, the figure suddenly unfurled what looked like a massive black set of wings, took to the sky where it circled the plant several times. Pules described the frightening events that followed as thus. Weren't we just in the middle of describing the events? The creature that then took flight and circled the plant 4 to 5 times. Some circuits he took at a fast pace and some he seemed to slow down, all while he kept his attention on a row of square-shaped buildings that I later found out housed the reactors. The creature then came toward us, flying at least 25 to 30 feet off the ground. The younger couple who had noticed the creature first were now screaming and cowering, "Godzilla!" The man shielding the woman was shielding his head with a jacket. My friend and I looked in awe as this creature flew over us. That's when I noticed two large red eyes. They seemed to glow from within and with a blood red hue. They were unblinking in the 3 to 4 seconds we saw them, and we knew they were looking straight at us. We knew this creature knew we could see it, and it made no attempt to disguise itself. The sick, intense, and overwhelming feeling of dread came over us. A feeling that we shouldn't be there, to say the least, was overwhelming. Then the bizarre flying humanoid creature suddenly flew off towards the town, and the friend fumbled with his cell phone trying to take pictures of it until it eventually faded away into the distance to leave the witnesses in a state of terrified confusion. Pules and his friend quickly vacated the area, and as soon as they got home, the two panicked men talked about what they had seen, trying to come to grips with what it had been. It was not until after he had returned to the States that he would be reminded of the creature once again, when the same friend woke him in the middle of the night in March, frantically talking about the huge earthquake that had just struck the area where he lived, practically leveling the town he was in. So yeah.
All I'm saying, man, is if this many people are seeing something, it's gotta be something, right? Right? Cool, I'm glad we're in agreement.
In 2009, I was in high school, and there was a report of massive breakouts of a virus known as swine flu, and thankfully I never got it. But there was a large area in Mexico where it outbroke in 2009. And right before that Mexican swine flu outbreak happened, I'll just read it. Are strange sightings of the Mothman in Mexico connected to the swine flu outbreak? That's what cryptozoologist Lauren Coleman is investigating after hearing that various sightings of the cryptid in Mexico surfaced right before the H1N1 virus. The last sighting occurred on March 9th, 2009, about a month before the virus hit and killed dozens. The creature was sketched by witnesses in the rural Mexico, the same place where the swine flu had originated, and it was dubbed Man-Bat. Oh, you ain't fooling me, Batman. Maybe Man-Bat caused the swine flu outbreak because they carry diseases, that's all I'm saying. Though he believes that there have been about 30 Mothman sightings in Mexico over the last few months, Coleman says it's not necessarily a case of cause and effect, but rather something worth noting. Mexico also claimed to see this creature in 2017, months before a devastating earthquake would rear its head. Mothman, a lot of earthquakes seem to follow you. What's going on, bud? Do you got something you want to tell me? Bud? Georgian newspaper Svobodnaya Goriazaya interviewed Russian UFOologists, and the man claimed that the Mothman was sighted in Moscow right before the 1999 Russian apartment bombings. Which, again, this is kind of like the 9/11 one, where it's like these were intentional, so it's hard to justify it, but maybe the criteria isn't as forward as we're making criteria about a creature that might not exist, Alex. It doesn't matter. It does. The Mothman has principles, and you will respect them. The cryptid first appeared in September 1999. It loves the month of September, let me tell you. It was described as having huge bat-like wings, red luminescent eyes, and a high-pitched scream, characteristics generally shared with the U.S. Mothman. It is said to have appeared multiple times, but it is unknown who the specific witnesses were, and how many times it was reported. There have also been reports of phone calls from unknown persons with warnings related to this, but it is not known if they truly related it to the Mothman. In 2004, the Indian Ocean earthquake that resulted in a tsunami that wiped out an estimated 227,898 people, in 14 countries, among others, the Mothman was sighted. Though I cannot confirm this one. It was mentioned in passing. There wasn't like an article detailing the story like there has for other ones. Same with this one from Maui. There was a massive fire outbreak in 2024, and they claim to have seen a humanoid flying thing prior to it. I only saw like one account of it, so I can't really confirm this one either. But yeah, I had kind of copied and pasted some stuff out of order. And so I'm going to end this with a clip from an article detailing the guy who saw Mothman before September 11th. And New York resident Stephen Moran captured a photograph of a winged entity near the ruins of the World Trade Center shortly after the attacks of September 11th. According to Moran, so see, that's not the MO. I don't know if I want to finish this, but I will, just for the sake of it. According to Moran, I live in New York, and when I heard the Twin Towers were attacked, I immediately rushed to the scene to take photographs. First of all, I took pictures of medical workers who were providing assistance. Then I took pictures of the site towards the south of Greenwich Street. When I got home, I realized there was an object that was caught by my camera. Speculation has grown to the nature of the flying creature, with some even saying that it was the Mothman once again appearing at the scene of a mass tragedy. Although others believe it to be a bird made out to appear larger than it actually is through forced perspective, Moran himself thinks it could be an angel. It looks like an angel was hovering above the ruins of the World Trade Center fractions, which I like. If he is making a hoax, he's doing a good job of subverting it. I don't even think it's the Mothman. Clearly, it's an angel. Maybe it's not a pigeon or a stork because of the large size. Moreover, we do not have the pelicans or bird carcasses here in New York. So, yeah, that is the end of the eyewitness versions of Mothman around the world. So, we've established his origin. Well, kinda. His origin of being spotted. His origin of losing hide-and-seek games, but he wants to be found. See, this is all such a conundrum, and it makes you wonder further, what is the Mothman? Where did it come from? And that's how we're going to kind of end this podcast, is one, talking about possible explanations of what the Mothman is. They're going to be very brief. And then two, the legacy that Mothman has left behind, because it has left a very positive legacy. Possible explanations, though. The first one I will be reading off is a lot of people speculate that the Mothman is the same thing as what the Native Americans once called the gigantic Great Thunderbird. They're giant birds with gray bodies and red heads. The Native Americans from the area surrounding Point Pleasant had stories of giant, terrible birds called thunderbirds. The only problem with this is that they are cryptids in their own rights. I don't believe there's any proof that they actually existed other than maybe giant feathers on Indian headdresses. But Native Americans would talk about these giant, terrible birds called thunderbirds that could easily swoop down and carry away a man. In fact, a couple of stories even claimed that this was the case. In their depictions and representative artifacts that were, provided to claim proof for these things, the images that were depicted resembled the Mothman, and thus they were lumped into the mix. Which opens itself up to claims that cite the Mothman that may even go as far back as the early 1600s. I'll go ahead and interject right here. The problem with this thing is the Mothman in every other depiction is known as a peaceful cryptid, whereas these thunderbirds literally attacked men. They literally attacked Native Americans. And so I feel like out of all the explanations that are listed on this, that's probably one of the more unlikely ones, though the Thunderbirds needed a shout out because they sound pretty cool. But for this next explanation, we're going to go back to the first story that was depicted of seeing the Mothman, of the four people, the two couples that were driving along the road. Sheriff George Johnson, who the original witnesses actually contacted, believed the Mothman may have been a large heron. Wildlife biologist Dr. Robert L. Smith at West Virginia University thought that the Mothman was a sandhill crane, which the newspapers then reported on, but the witnesses completely disagreed. Now, initially hearing this, the Mothman is often described as like a bat-like creature or a large bird, but we tend to, traverse more towards like a man-bat type creature, because if you look at the statue, and I think I've already said this in the podcast, we're about an hour in, so I may be redundant at this point, but the statue in Point Pleasant, West Virginia looks like a giant moth with the head of a bat. That's essentially what Mothman is depicted as. And so whenever you hear that description or see the statue, you're like, it's not a giant bird. But then I saw a picture of a sandhill crane, specifically ones that have red around their eyes. And most birds, when you shine a light directly on their eyes, it reflects a reddish color. And so whenever I saw this and see how big they can get, I see it as a really good possible explanation. I don't even take into consideration that the witnesses disagreed when they saw like the pictures and stuff, mainly because when you're in the heat of the moment, especially in a situation that they found themselves in where it's dark and stressful, your brain's probably going to warp the details a little bit. So you're going to be like, oh no, it was a moth. It was a moth. I know what I saw. It wasn't just a bird, even if it was just a bird. So I think out of all of the, we go from one of the least believable options on this list to one of the more believable ones. But I think there is one more believable one, and skeptic Joe Nickel posited owls as an explanation because of their eye shine and the silhouette resembling that headless Mothman that has become so iconic. Most modern skeptics seem to agree with Joe Nickel, but the sightings might just be too extraordinary to attribute them to such animals. Again, much like seeing the sandhill crane, the owl's eyes are perfectly described and perfectly look like those glowing red eyes that look like those caution lights, the red radiated. I can't think of them. I need to go to sleep soon. But they really do resemble that perfectly. There's actually a photo I'll be posting on my social medias that has the two side by side. And in the middle of the night, if you saw their silhouettes and everything, you could be like, hey, yeah, no, I see that. But you don't have to take my word for it. Follow us on the social medias and see for yourself. But I'm going to keep pushing forward with these explanations. Because of the warnings that it brought, or the curse, rather, in some people's eyes, there are theories that it's either an angel or a demon. I don't really have any articles or, speculations to back this one up. But that's what some people do believe. There are also theories about the Mothman being an alien or a government experience. Most of the government experience ones have surfaced due to it being a humanoid type creature, citing the Fly movie where Jeff Goldblum fuses with a fly and becomes this monstrosity. That's the kind of thing they're thinking of. Also due to the location of Point Place containing a former military ammunition storage unit and containing a power plant that is said to be home to a secret lab, those are both supporting claims as to why it could be one of these things. The power plant and everything obviously supporting the experiment/humanoid creature. There's also a theory out there that it could be a mutated bird, and you could throw that one into this mix. We're not done talking about the alien or human experiment type thing yet, but that one is also suggested. The picture that was actually provided on the website was just a giant chicken with human legs, which made me laugh. But we'll see. I'm going to keep going. There were also many reports of men in black visiting various residents of Point Pleasant who reported seeing the Mothman. You may recognize the Men in Black as a name to a fun Will Smith comedy movie, but the reality is that the source material came from somewhere. The Men in Black, or MIB, are mysterious strangers that reportedly attempted to threaten witnesses and reporters of strange occurrences, such as the Mothman, into silence. They wanted to buy their silence with fear. Some were reported as having dark features, an Eastern European look, expressionless faces, and strange eyes, sometimes covered by dark sunglasses. Their movements often appeared to be inhuman in nature. Yeah, there's a theory that they sent aliens to track down aliens, and Men in Black were actually aliens, and that's something they didn't tell us in the movie. Will Smith, why? They usually traveled in groups of 2 or 3 and had a knack for knowing things about the witnesses that they taunted, things that only the witnesses knew. There were even reports of them being masters of illusion by way of making themselves appear and disappear without a trace. So like the Batman thing, wherever they're like standing in a circle and Batman's a part of them. The 2 people talk to each other and then they look in Batman's direction and he's just gone. That's what I imagine they're doing. Some have reported them carrying sophisticated gadgets, and one woman claims the MIB erased part of her memory. The little light stick that... Pew! Unknown persons were reported to frequent the small town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, usually dressed from head to toe in black suits, white shirts, black ties, and black shoes, which all appeared to be perfect in appearance, but yet completely out of style by the time 1966 and 1967 came around, which is the time of the reports. They are said to have asked people questions about the Mothman and told them not to speak about it. Not only did they visit reporter Mary Hyre and question her about the creature, but one of them is said to have also threatened Mothman witnesses such as Connie Carpenter. We talked about her a little bit earlier. A friend of Mary Hyre, named Dottie Campbell, spoke on the subject of the Men in Black interviews. She said that she and Mary were very frightened by them, and that Hyre had mentioned to her that these strange men never blinked their eyes. Mothman witness Linda Scarberry said in an interview, "The men in black wore black suits, black hats, and sunglasses. They drove black cars, Cadillacs, I think. They looked like human beings, but their skin was somewhat transparent." Linda Scarberry was also very disturbed. I think we've already mentioned that. "You could see veins in their hands very clearly. Their fingers were longer than the normal person's fingers as well. Daddy shook hands with them, and he said they were awkward in shaking hands. They seemed to not know what to do or how to shake hands." She said one of the cars would follow us around. There were 3 men in the car. The men in black went so far as to follow us through a drive-thru of a restaurant. We were afraid to turn around and just looked in the mirror at them. A man and a woman carrying a camera visited Mothman witnesses Steve and Mary Millette, wanting to take a picture of them. The Millettes took down the license plate of the Volkswagen, but the police said the number was non-existent. So yeah, that's a main reason why a lot of people support the alien claim, is because the men in black are not just reported by one of the witnesses, by a bunch of them. But the thing about stuff like this, and we keep going down to it, and this is where I'm going to insert my opinion. Alex, do you believe in the Mothman? And to some extent, I do. I don't think it is the big creature that you see in a statue form in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. I do believe the validity of the claims that it was probably a giant bird like an owl or a sandhill crane or something of the sort. And in the midst of the moment, whether under one reason or another, fear has a way of bending the mind to see things even further. Like if you ever watch Batman, and I'm going to keep bringing him up because there are parallels between these two things. You think of Scarecrow's fear toxin, and what the fear toxin does is it plays on chemicals of the brain and warps them to a ridiculous level. Well, that fear toxin from those movies really does play off a real life thing where under fear, a toxin shoots through your brain, because the brain is all about chemicals, and it can distort things whenever you're under immense pressure, whenever you're under immense fear, whenever you're under immense any emotion. It can affect the way you visualize things, and even in some cases make you hallucinate. And so, like in the Batman Begins movie, whenever people are hit with the fear toxin, they look up at Batman as he's gliding across the sky and see this demon-like creature gliding across the sky, even though it was just a guy in a bat suit. Which, yeah, that's his whole thing. He plays off fear and everything, but you get what I mean. It warped it up to, it's not just this human in a bat costume, it's this demon, and he's coming for us. Which I believe the brain could also do that for a bird in the dark whenever it's creepy and it's flying after your car. Especially if it's a bird that you're not used to seeing, like the sandhill crane. But with all of the extra stuff that a lot of people tend to claim, I don't want to mark it up to mass hysteria or people trying to, by using, I'll use a popular term today, who are clout chasing, trying to jump on this trend of, they saw the Mothman. Well, I saw the Mothman too. Yeah, come get my story. I don't want it to attest to that. I really want to believe these people saw something. And even though Mothman is probably my favorite cryptid out there, I don't know if I can fully believe in the actual entity of the Mothman. It is something else, and it is something that can be explained outside of it being an alien or, some experiment by the government. But whatever it is, it has brought a lot of prosperity to the people of Point Pleasant. It originally was something that was tragic, something that struck fear in the residents of Point Pleasant, but now it makes them very profitable. It's a very productive festival that comes around in Point Pleasant that literally brings millions of dollars in revenue for like a week of Mothman festivities. The Mothman Festival is an annual commemoration of the visit of the cryptid known as the Mothman. It started in 2002 and is held on the third weekend of every September. Figure. September is one of its favorite months in downtown Point Pleasant, West Virginia. It's located next to the Mothman Museum and the Mothman statue. The festival features a wide variety of vendors, guest speakers, live music, food, and events of all ages. People from all over the world come to experience the unique atmosphere and learn more about this Mothman creature. The legend of the Mothman lives on in museums. A 12-foot tall chrome statue of the beast and the Mothman plushies being held in the arms of children as they visit many of the gift shops of the town. And also, whereas most of the tourist spots are going to be in like New York City and California, you would never think of Point Pleasant as a tourist attraction. It's this little dinky town. Like, picture one of those small old-time towns that you could just walk up the store, buy a Coke from the vending machine, and like everybody knows everybody. It's one of those towns, but it is a very hot tourist attraction, makes a lot of money, and it's all because the legend of the Mothman. Normally, whenever you hear stories about cryptids, it's people going into the forest and getting lost and all sorts of other things. People literally have lost their lives looking for a cryptid like Bigfoot. But Mothman seems to bring prosperity, even though he is the harbinger of doom and is spotted in all of these scary, before all these scary events and these tragic events. He's brought a lot of prosperity to this little town that was suffering for a long time. And that's where I'll leave that. The Mothman is a beautiful thing, even though it may not be real. Maybe he does. Maybe I'm wrong. I can be wrong, guys. But I'm not wrong about something I'll talk about here in a little bit. But I am going to close the discussion of the Mothman here today. It's not over yet. Like I said, I'm planning on buying the Mothman Prophecies book. I already have. And I am going to read it and see if it's worth making into an episode of its own. If not, it'll be mentioned on a future episode. The Mothman will come again, much like he did in his story that we know throughout history. And hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Let me know if there's another cryptid you want me to talk, because I had a lot of fun researching this. But I digress. I've spent a lot of time talking about it. And since we're going to revisit this creature in the future, there's no reason to dwell and stretch it out and, I just gotta make the moment last because it's never gonna happen again. No, it's gonna happen again. So we can move forward, and sadly I don't have a Myrar for this week, which I guess it's a good thing that I don't have time to sit down and really watch movies all that much. Life's been going 1,000 miles an hour these past couple weeks. Normally during the weekend, that would be the best time to sit down and watch like a movie, especially since movies nowadays are like 2 hours long. Then again, I guess I could watch an older movie that's like an hour, 20 minutes. But I promise at some point I will have a Myrar. My goal is to just sit down, watch like 3 movies over a weekend, and then stretch them out over some episodes. Something like that. By the end of the year, I want like 20 movies on the Myrar. So it's going to happen. It is going to happen. Even though that is some negative news right there, no Myrar for this week, there is some positive news on the way. That's right, we like to end every podcast with a positive word, so you can go off into your day, your weekend, your week, whatever it may be. We want you to go out of this episode and into that with the best possible mindset or feeling motivated. And guys, it is working. We got very positive feedback, especially in the last one, because, well, hearing people's motivational words straight from their mouth is probably a lot more inspirational than hearing me read it when you just listen to me talk for an hour and a half. And I heard very good positive feedback on you guys getting to hear Jocko tell you the good mindset last week. So I'm going to continue that. I continue to read his books, and then I'm like, oh yeah, he talked about that on the podcast once. And so I go and find the clip, and I'm going to play that for you right now, and I'll give my thoughts on it and tell you why I chose that. But it's a pretty good one. It's talking about people talking about you in the workplace, or people creating a negative environment in the workplace, and Jocko's opinion on the best way to tackle that.
Would you confront an individual team member when reported by other team members that they're talking smack about you, or would you just ignore them?
The old classic here. What do you do about the negative guy that's trying to bring you down? And sure, you can confront them, right? And you can, by doing that, join in their little game. And in doing that, you give them the satisfaction. They now know that they got into your head. And then you're turning your workplace into, your basic grade school gossip hall. So we don't like that. But now there are times, unfortunately, that you have to address things. And when you do it professionally. And you do it, your goal is to disarm them. Because remember that this negative person inside, they probably want the confrontation. That's what they want. And so, you say something like, hey, I heard you had some critique points for me about how I'm doing my job. If I'd love to get your feedback so I can tighten up my game. So you just disarm them a little bit. And something like that will likely diffuse the scenario a little bit. And, hopefully the people will the person will understand that there are other people that are telling you what's going on. It'll kind of put them in check and stifle the situation. But the preferred methodology for this situation for me is quite simple. And that is ignore and outperform them. You see, while you're over there watching me and talking about me, I'm working. I'm working hard. I'm taking things to the next level. You keep gossiping and I'll keep working. You keep talking smack and I'll keep working. You keep focusing on everything and everyone else and I'll keep working. And when you finally look around at where you are and where I'm at, you'll realize that you have nothing left to talk smack about. And you will lose and I will win. And this here applies to when people are playing office politics or forming their little cliques or working their personal agendas. And again, I know sometimes you have to play those games. But let your first course of action, let the fundamental core of your reaction be to outwork and outperform every last one of them.
So, the reason why I chose that clip to share is because the words ignore and outperform are extremely powerful. Not just in this scenario, but other scenarios. In fact, the main way in which I think about what he's saying here doesn't even necessarily apply to people talking about you in the workplace, because that's always going to happen. There's always going to be gossip and dissent in most workplaces. I don't think I've ever worked in a workplace where I haven't heard somebody talking about me in some facet, and that's just how it goes. That's how people are. They're going to talk. And the best way you can deal with that, maybe there are going to be times where you have to step up, but that's rarely the case. And I like what Jocko said here. While they're busy paying attention to what you're doing and how you're carrying yourself, you can just worry about improving, getting better, getting your work done to the best of your ability. And the reason why I chose this one is because I chose to, as someone who has severe ADHD, I have 1,000 thoughts in my playing in my head nonstop. And even though I may come off as confident, especially to a lot of my friends, a lot of those thoughts are self-doubting, questioning myself, telling myself I'm not good enough. And so the ignore and outperform doesn't just have to deal with other people talking about me. It can deal with ignoring those thoughts that may come through my head and pushing forward and proving myself wrong, if that makes sense. I have more than what my brain seems to think that I have. I have more than what, people may limit me to with their words, that I may limit myself with those same words. And it's just one of those, put your head down and keep pursuing, because even if those words are right, you can always improve. You can always take that next step, work hard, and become better. Jocko also, and I don't know if it's in the same episode or if it's in a different episode, he talks about how growing up amongst his peers, he was never the fastest, he was never the strongest, he was never the best at a single attribute, but what he had that a lot of people in his neighborhood didn't have was he was a hard worker. And because of that, he was able to make up the difference, and he was able to compete. And so not only did I take it that way, but it's also a reminder that if you keep to yourself, you might not put your foot in your mouth. Because I actually had a situation at work where I thought someone was talking about me. And without confronting them, I kind of confronted them. I confronted them. It wasn't, yeah. And turns out they weren't even talking about me. They were just kind of looking in my direction because it looked like I had a lot of work on my plate and they were wondering if I needed help. And that's another reason to kind of just ignore the noise around you in work, because often your mind plays tricks on you. That's something that, well, I just kind of revealed. Your mind can be a very deceiving thing, and that's why you have to train it. And that's why I like listening to Jocko's podcast, because he puts things in a very basic, a very simple way that even a crazy, kind of dumb dude like me can understand. And, yeah. It makes me feel like I can run through a brick wall. So I love doing it. And hopefully you guys continue to enjoy it too. Hopefully you guys don't self-doubt yourselves. Take it from me, a guy who has wasted a lot of time self-doubting himself. You have more than what you think you have. And you have the ability to do more than you think you are capable of doing. And I encourage you to push forward today. Because that's what I'm going to do, and we can do this together. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode of the podcast, the positive words, the Mothman talk. Let me know in the comments section. Whenever you send me text, whenever you talk to me on social media, whenever you guys tell me whether you like something or you didn't like something. I love it all, and it helps me make a better product. So thank you for that. Thank you for listening. Thank you for the support, and for the couple of you that continue to reach out to me, Rocky, Annalise are the two off the top of my head. Thank you guys. It means the world to me. It helps me push forward when my ADHD angry brain tells me not to. And I know I'm sounding probably crazy, but it really does mean the world to me. So thank you guys so much. Don't forget to give this podcast 5 stars. Rate us, comment, do all the things, and do it publicly because it helps us with the algorithm. We have to beat the algorithm. Oh, and also check out the Jocko podcast. They are over 500 episodes deep. And that little nugget that I just played was from episode 61. It was an hour and 40 minutes long. And they typically upload podcasts around 3 to 4 hours. So if you want thousands upon thousands of hours of motivational goodness, that is a podcast I would recommend checking out. I wouldn't even mind if when Spotify Wrapped or whatever you listen on your podcast, whatever end of the year thing it is, if they were your most listened to podcast, I'm completely fine with that, though. Hopefully Xandom Thoughts is number 2. Even though we've only uploaded like 6 episodes so far, you better have listened to them at least 2 times. Yeah, but if you've made it through an hour and a half of listening to me talk, it feels wrong to ask any more of you. So thank you guys, but I will be greedy and ask you one more thing. Please have a great day, a great weekend. Whatever it is, whatever you're doing, make it a great one. And I'll see you in the next one, guys.